So we are in Luke chapter 9. And in chapter 8, we covered, actually, it took us 2 weeks to do that. And we talked about how when Jesus came, he was breaking all their rules. It's Pharisaic Judaism. It's the law plus their laws combined. He raises Jairus' daughter in the very last part. And before that, he heals a woman of a flow of blood. Remember what she grabbed to get the healing?
Tassel.
Yes, the tassel, which is, remember I showed you the robe or whatever, and it had that on there, right? And they would wind it so it added up to 13 because tzitzit, the Hebrew word for this, was 600. So that added up to 613, which was what? Anybody remember what it was, 613?
Laws.
The number of commandments, according to the rabbis. Correct. And so when they looked at their tassel or their tzitzit, what was it supposed to remind them of?
All the laws.
Yes, the commandments of God. So they made it add up to the total number of commandments. The very corner of their garments was the kanaf. That's the Hebrew word. So when we go to like Psalms and it talked about coming under God's wings, it really was saying coming under God's kanaf, the corner of his robe, where the tassels were. And then Ruth came under those, the wings of God or the kanaf of God. Then later came under Boaz's. It signifies coming under somebody for a covering, for protection, okay, for guidance. And so we are to come under God's tzitzit, or his kanaf. Then we have Malachi 4:2. That's where we keyed in on, which was the sun, S-U-N of righteousness, right, would rise with healing in its wings. And that word for wings is kanaf, where the tzitzit were. So that's why people were grabbing the edges of his garment, because they knew that prophecy. And that's what she did. So she did it in faith. And then we talked about how even though there's crowds around Jesus, there's a way you can touch him where he knows you touched him, because you're touching him out of desperation. And I think that's the way every Christian should be. Doesn't matter if it's good times or bad times. You should be desperate for Jesus, right? I mean, don't wait till the times get bad.
Well, he felt power come out of him.
Yes, he felt the power leave him. It's actually the word dunamis, I think. Yes, dunamis. And guess what word we get from dunamis? Dynamite. We get the word dynamite from dunamis, which is the Greek for power. He felt the dynamite power come out of him. Yeah, so very telling there. Very telling there. Okay. And now let's go ahead and start chapter 9, verse 1. Okay, and I'm going to go back and forth a lot between Matthew and Luke, because they're parallel passages, and sometimes Matthew adds a little more, okay, that might kind of fill in some gaps. Now, here it says in Luke 9:1, he called the 12 together and gave them dunamis, or power, and authority over all demons and to heal diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to perform healing. Now, if you go to the Matthew account, Matthew 9:37, he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. He's talking about people there, right? And he says this, therefore beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. Now, here's the funny thing. In the very next verse, chapter 10, verse 1 in Matthew, Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast out and to heal every kind of disease and every kind of sickness, and then he sent them out. So he's saying, pray that God sends workers out in the harvest, and then what happens? He sends them out. Probably because they prayed. So sometimes God, you'll see a need and you'll pray about it, and God will have you fill it. All right. Now, he gave them all this power over demons and to heal diseases. Now they're going to come back rejoicing, which I would too. Can you imagine going through a time like that where there's an unusual amount of demon possession and you could just cast out the demon. That would be kind of fun. And they came back rejoicing, and he said, don't rejoice in that. What are we supposed to rejoice in? Do you remember what he said to them? Anyone? He said, rejoice that your name is written in heaven. Rejoice in your salvation, not the power that you have here on this earth. Rejoice that you are going to go to heaven. And he's right. He just put things into perspective, all right? Verse 2, and he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to perform healing. Matthew chapter 10 again. He calls it the kingdom of heaven. Now, just so you know, you guys heard kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven, right? And some people make a big deal about the difference between the two. Now, honestly, I haven't been able to find it. And I'm sure it's there. But only Matthew has the kingdom of heaven. The other gospel is called the kingdom of God. Who is Matthew written to? The Jews. Written to the Jews. And to the Jew, here's the way you would write God. I'm going to anglicise it. You wouldn't say God, because to the Jew you don't say his title or you don't say his name. So if you were writing it in today's vernacular, you would do that.
Or say something like the one.
The name, Hashem. Yeah, Hashem is what they call him. All right? In fact, if you go to the Temple Institute on YouTube, you hear their head rabbi there. He's always talking about Hashem, the name. Because they won't use his title. They won't call him Adonai or anything like that. So that's why the kingdom of heaven is always in Matthew. It's not in the other ones. And if you cross-reference that to the other Gospels, it'll have kingdom of God. All right, because he was writing to the Jews, and you wouldn't write out God like that. Ha is the, Shem is name. Okay, so it's the name, and in fact, it actually has that in I think 1 John. It's either 1st, 2nd, or 3rd John. It talks about how they went out for the sake of the name. So regular Orthodox Jew, even today, if you're referring to God, you don't call him Elohim, okay, which would be the Hebrew word for God. Verse 3, and he said to them, take nothing for your journey, neither a staff, nor a bag, nor bread, nor money, and do not even take 2 tunics apiece. Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave that city. Now, that's not, you have to be careful. That's not an all-time commandment for everybody. In other words, well, Jesus said don't take extra stuff. So when you guys travel or go on vacation, do you take extra clothes? Yeah, because this isn't applied to you. Because later on, he says this, okay? In Luke 22:35, in the same gospel, he said to them, when I send you out without money, belt and bag, and sandals, you didn't lack anything, did you? They said, no, nothing. And he said to them, but now, whoever has a money belt is to take it along, likewise a bag, and whoever has no sword is to sell his coat and buy one. So it changed. And that's what I'm always saying now. Things that applied before, because now we're in this special period of time just before the rapture, and things get really hairy, and they're getting hairy now. Maybe things that we applied before don't necessarily work now. It's not that God's commandments have changed. When properly applied, they always apply. But, and I can't elaborate more than that. I could go on, the rest of the time like that. But sometimes we get stuck in recipes, unfortunately. Here he's saying don't take along extra stuff. He's going to send them out to go before him. Now, this is just the 12. What were these 12 named? Not their personal names, but what were they called? They were the apostles. So they're actually disciples and apostles, but there's only 12 apostles. Now, he had many disciples, and at one time he sent out 70 of them. Okay? So in the Hebrew, it's teledim, disciples. And that's what a rabbi had. That was his students that followed him and that tried to learn everything they could from him. Disciples. Now, the apostles was more like a sent one. I think that's the literal meaning of it. It's like an ambassador. And there's only 12. Because he says you're going to sit on the 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, there's only 12 thrones. So, you know what I'm saying? It's limited at 12. Now, other people, I think like Timothy and some other people are called apostles. That's where you hear people say apostles, big A, and then apostles, little a. Okay? So there, I know. I don't want to get too confusing. So some other people besides the 12 are referred to as apostles. In other words, they're sent, but they're not part of the 12. Now, here's a quiz question for 100 bonus points. Judas was one of the 12. Okay, obviously, he's not going to sit on one of the 12 tribes. Who was the 12th one? Most people, or a lot of people would say it's the Apostle Paul. But it's not him. You know why?
He was already an apostle.
No. He wasn't at that time. He was called later on the road to Damascus. But he was the apostle to the Gentiles. Whereas the 12 apostles are to sit on the 12 tribes judging, or sit on the 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. They're apostles to the Jews. So actually he's separate, is what I believe and a lot of other people believe. And then later on in Acts, what happens is they draw straws, basically. You know, and it's like Mattathias and someone else. And it said whoever got it, I can't remember who, was counted or numbered amongst the 12. Disciple is a learner, a follower. An apostle is a sent one, an ambassador, okay? And then he said in verse 4, whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave that city. Now, back then they didn't have the Holiday Inn or Motel 6. So hospitality was a big thing. In fact, in their writings, the rabbis, they put a big emphasis on hospitality. So if you went into a town, you probably could just get invited to a stranger's house to stay. In fact, they said that if you invite a stranger in, it's something like very Shekinah that you entertained. In other words, the Shekinah glory, the very glory of God. God counts it like that. So very high premium on hospitality. They had that extra room in the back, a guest room. That's where remember it said about Mary and Joseph that the inn was filled and they had to stay, in the stable. The inn was actually a name for that extra room. Same word used for the upper room for the Passover. It's not an inn like a hotel. They have another word for that. And the hotels they had were very shady. You wouldn't want to stay there. So now he's going to send him out. Don't take anything extra. You enter into a house. Stay there until you leave that city. Then verse 5. And as for those who do not receive you, go out from that city and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. All right. What does that mean? Shake the dust off your feet. What it was, if people left Israel and they went into a foreign land before they came across the border to Israel, especially the rabbis, they would shake the dust off their feet. In other words, the Gentile lands are contaminated. We don't even want the dust of that unclean Gentile land getting into Israel. And so when you went to a town and they rejected the gospel and you shook up your dust, you were saying you're just like the Gentiles. You rejected the message, and this is a testimony against you. I remember several years back, this Jehovah's Witness came to my door. And so I let him in, and we talked for a while. And my father was a Jehovah's Witness, so I knew more about the Jehovah's Witness than anything else the first few years as a Christian. Okay? I'm sorry. They're easy to refute if you know what you're talking about and how they misuse scripture. So anyways, he kind of got mad, and then he came back the next time with his with a helper. And then so I kind of, refuted them. And then he got madder. He goes, okay, is it okay if I bring somebody else next time I come? I said, sure. And then next time he brought an elder with him. And I basically, it was the same old pattern. They would ask me questions and I would answer them. It's like, well, when you die, do you go to heaven? Well, that's a misnomer. Here's what happens, blah, blah, blah. We go up for 7 years, but then we come down to earthly paradise, which you guys mix up with, with the final state, blah, 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 some millennial kingdom. And then he really got mad. And then he stormed out. And then the next Saturday, somebody who was living in this house said, hey, the guy was here and he was on the curbside and he was going like this, wiping his feet off. So he was shaking the dust off his feet on my curbside. It's just like, well, if you want to talk, I'll ask you questions, you answer them, and you can ask me anything. I'll answer it. Okay? And so, oh gosh, it was funny. Yeah. So in Matthew 10:15, he says this about people who reject them and that they would wipe the dust off their feet. He said this, truly I say to you, it would be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Whoa, wait a minute. Hang on a second. Weren't Sodom and Gomorrah really evil? Yeah. They talked about, like in the book, I think Jubilees or something, they put beds on the side of the roads. If a stranger came into town, if he was too short, they would stretch him out until he screamed or ripped apart to go the length of the bed. Or if he was bigger than the bed, they would squash him in. I mean, it was open debauchery, obviously. I know. It was from the ancient records. You know what I'm saying? We have a picture of what it was. It's much worse than that. Now here, we're talking about very moral places. Of course, you always have sinners and all that, okay? Very moral, religious people. And Jesus is telling us judgment is going to be worse for them than Sodom and Gomorrah. Why is that? Any ideas? Here's why. Because judgment depends on the amount of light that you have. Did the people during Jesus' time have more light than the people in Sodom and Gomorrah? Yeah. Now, the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, according to Romans 1, had light. But they rejected that. That's why they got into darkness. But the people during the time of Jesus, oh my gosh, they had the very Messiah there with all these truths. And then he sent out his very apostles. If they reject that, watch out. Now, let me ask you this. If Jesus was here today, would he say, compared to those cities, Santa Fe is going to face much worse judgment? Could he say that? I would think so. The amount of light that we have so many Bibles, reference books, everything. We have even less excuse than they have. Plus, we understand worldwide what's happening. Plus, we have all the prophecies. Now, you might say, well, I don't read that, understand that. Well, guess what? Guess whose fault that is? Yours. God's not going to say, well, you didn't read that, so I won't hold you accountable. No, it was available to us. He will hold us accountable. So that is kind of a scary passage. Departing, they began to go out throughout the villages, preaching the gospel and healing everywhere. Now we're going to have kind of a sidebar here. This is verse 7. Now Herod the Tetrarch. A tetrarch is the ruler of a fourth of a territory. In other words, there's 4 rulers there. He's one of the rulers, Herod. Now, when you study Herod's family, it's a mess. People were marrying their nieces, their sisters, their first cousins. I mean, you talk about, you'd have to spend a year just undoing the family tree, just so you know that, okay? It was a joke. Now, Herod the Tetrarch heard of all the things that was happening, and he was greatly perplexed, because it was said by some that John had risen from the dead. Now, why is he concerned about that? John the Baptist is risen from the dead? Here's why. Okay, because he had John beheaded. very guilty conscience. And I'll just give you a review what happened. John the Baptist was rebuking Herod. His other name was Antipas. Antipas means against all. Anti, as in Antichrist. Pas means all. So he's against all. Anyways, he was rebuking him because Herod had married his brother's wife. He stole her away, and he says, it's not lawful for you to have her. Okay? And so here's a guy that was just telling it like it was. Now, why would he put a Gentile king under the law like that? Because that's kind of the standard. If you have the law like the Jews, that's one thing, and then God writes the law in your heart. It's called your conscience. So stealing someone else's wife, especially your brother's and all that, was not right. So one day, her daughter, not by Herod, came in and danced. Okay, got them all excited. Her name was Salome, according to secular records, okay, not the Bible. And he goes, I'll give you whatever you want. And then she goes to her mom, Herodias, who hated John the Baptist. But John was in prison at that time. Goes, what should I ask for? She goes, the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Now, Herod didn't want to do it, but he made that rash, stupid promise. When you make rash, stupid promises, guess what? You know, you'll pay for it. They had his head cut off, brought to the mom. Now, according to Jerome, an early church father, she pulled his tongue out, got her hairpin, stuck it through the tongue into the platter. That's the kind of evil and decadence that they had. And remember what Jesus said about John the Baptist? That nobody has arisen greater than John the Baptist, right? In other words, who is greater, John the Baptist or King David? According to Jesus, John the Baptist. He was greater than Moses, Elijah, King David. You go down through the list, you know what I'm saying? This was a great guy, great man of God. And yet, look how he was treated by the world. In a dark, dirty dungeon. And in fact, he sends his messengers to Jesus and said, hey, are you the coming one? Are we going to get this on the road? And because he's rotten away. And then he finally gets his head removed from him. And his disciples come and take his body away. Let's go to verse 8. And, well, this is Herod. He was all perplexed because he's afraid that John had risen from the dead. And he was saying, and by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the prophets of old had arisen again. Okay? So that's what he's hearing about this Jesus. He's wondering, is this John the Baptist? And other people are talking about this guy named Elijah? All right? And we'll possibly get to why they're talking about Elijah, because in the last two verses of the Old Testament, God said this, behold, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. Okay, and he will restore the hearts of the fathers to the children, the hearts of the children to the fathers, so that I did not come and smite the land with a curse. So, the Jews were expecting Elijah. Was John Elijah?
But didn't the Lord tell him that Elijah had already come?
Yeah, he said, well, they came down, they said, why did, they asked Jesus, his disciples, asked him a question, why did they say Elijah must come first? And he said, he did come. And they did to him whatever they wished. He was talking about John the Baptist. Okay? So, he came, was John the Baptist Elijah? Actually, he came in the spirit and power of Elijah, is what it tells us. Now, if the Jews had accepted Jesus, he would have been the Elijah prophesied. But now, the real Elijah is coming back before the second coming of the Lord, because he's one of the two witnesses. Okay? So, I mean, isn't it funny how all these prophecies can work out like that?
Yeah, it's crazy.
You would never figure it out before it happened, or before you had hindsight on this. Herod said in verse 9, I myself had John beheaded, John the Baptist, But who is this man about whom I hear such things? And he kept trying to see him. It's talking about Jesus. Now the apostles, they were sent out by Jesus. They come back. It says this: when the apostles returned, they gave an account to him, to Jesus, of all they had done. Taking them with him, he withdrew by himself to a city called Bethsaida. Okay? And the crowds were aware of this and followed him and welcomed him and were speaking to him about the kingdom of God and curing those who had need of healing. So at that time, what was their message? Was it that Jesus died on the cross and repent and get saved? Well, it couldn't be that Jesus died on the cross at that point, right? He hadn't died on the cross. So they were talking about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, which is what they would think of as the Messianic kingdom, what we think of as the millennial kingdom. But it wasn't God's timing for it to happen then. So let's go to verse 12. Now day was ending, and the 12 came and said to him, send the crowds away, that they might go into the surrounding villages and countryside and find lodging and get something to eat, for we are here in a desolate place. Verse 13, he said to them, you give them something to eat. And they said, we have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless perhaps we go and buy food for all these people. For there are about 5,000 men. Now, they didn't count the women and the children. So there could have been 10 to 20,000. That's a big crowd. Okay? That's a big crowd. Yeah, very big. So, and he's telling his 12 disciples, you feed them. And they're like, whoa, there's no way we have all that food, right? So God is asking them to do something that's impossible. But he's still commanding it. So, Donnie, if God commands you to fly, what are you supposed to do? Try and fly. Right. You could say, I can't do that. It's impossible, right? But if God commands you to, you know he's going to empower you, or else he would not have commanded you to. Verse 14, and he said to his disciples, have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. They did so and had them all sit down. Verse 16, then he, Yeshua, Jesus, took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, that's all they had, and looking up to heaven, he blessed them and broke them and kept giving them to the disciples to set before the people. Now, let's suppose there's 15,000 people there. Let's be conservative. Okay, it says right there in verse 16, he blessed and broke. Did he bless the bread? Well, I don't think the bread can receive a blessing. How could you bless bread? The bread doesn't receive the blessing. It's what he actually says is he blessed. Who did he bless? Not the disciple. He blessed God. Yeah. Okay, let me read it again. Verse 16. He took the 5 loaves and 2 fish. I'll read it the way some versions have it, okay? He took the 5 loaves and 2 fish and kept looking up to heaven, and he blessed God and broke the bread and kept giving them to the disciples to set before the people. So right there, it was their thing. I mean, like for instance, in Deuteronomy 8:10, it talks about how you're to thank God for, all his good provision. 8:10, Deuteronomy 8:10. And so they would do that. And so they're not blessing the food. The food can't receive a blessing. It's an inanimate object. It's like me praying, oh, coffee table, be blessed. Well, I wouldn't do that, would I? It doesn't make any sense. So he just blessed. Who'd he bless? God. Because you're thanking him. God, thank you. You made, the rain and the bread that comes down. The rain comes down from heaven that produces the bread, on and on. And then he broke the loaves and he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the broken pieces which were left over were picked up 12 basketfuls. Now, there's some commentaries, I'll go on the quick aside, who say this. The lesson here is sharing. Everybody was selfish and didn't want to share their food. So here's what Jesus did. He had this long-sleeved robe. He backed up into a cave entrance. The disciples are back there. They had all the food, and they were pushing the food up through his sleeves, and it'd come in his hand, and he would give it to the people. I know, I know, kind of stupid, isn't it? But that's the way they explained away the miracles. What actually happened was his 12, after he broke and blessed, his 12 disciples kept getting the stuff, and it kept multiplying.
Yeah.
So he had his 12 disciples going through there and stuff. And everybody obviously had their filled, and they had 12 baskets left over, which happened to be 12 apostles or 12 disciples with them. Okay, now verse 18. And it happened that while he was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he questioned them, saying, "Who do people say that I am?" Now, that is the most important question in the world for each and every one of us. Who do you say that Jesus is? The liberal would say, well, he was a great teacher. Okay? He was no more than that. He had some great sayings, some great teachings. Yeah, right. If I go around and say, I'm God Almighty, I'm God in the flesh, and I'm going to die for your sins, am I a great teacher? No, I'm a lunatic. That's not a great teacher. That's stupid. That is absolutely stupid. But who do you say that I am? And they answered. This is the disciples answered. Here's what the people say. Well, John the Baptist. Some say Elijah, because they know that Elijah was going to come back. And others say one of the prophets of old, right? Now, in Matthew 16:14, they include the name of Jeremiah. Why would they think Jesus was Jeremiah? Here's why. It's because Jeremiah presided over the destruction of Jerusalem. He wrote the book of Jeremiah. He lived a terrible life. Okay? It's not as though the prophets today, they stay in cushy hotels. They drive around in limousines. They stay at the fanciest hotel. That's not the way it was with God's prophets. They were despitefully treated. It says in Hebrews, men of whom the world was not worthy. Okay? Spitefully treated. And Jeremiah was one. He was put into a deep, dark, cold well for a while. In fact, I think his servant had to beg for him to get out. And he was always crying and weeping. Then he wrote the book of Lamentations, which is after the Babylonians came in and destroyed the city. And you just read the book of Jeremiah. All I got to say is, you would think it was written by a modern day prophet about the United States of America. I'm serious. You would think it was. It's pretty sad. And God uses very graphic language, but in Lamentations, he's weeping and mourning over the city. And so he was known by the Jews as the weeping prophet. So why would Jesus be associated with him? Because in Isaiah 53, it says he was a man of sorrow, acquainted with grief. So if you happen to see a series on TV, and I'm not going to name any names, where he's being jesting and playful all the time, and John the Baptist comes out from behind a rock and says, "Boo!" Then maybe they're not accurately portraying things, okay? Because he was born to die. The only man ever born to die. That was his purpose. He was associated with Jeremiah the prophet. Jeremiah the prophet was known as the weeping prophet because of his ministry. And besides, all the prophets were despitefully treated, and I'm sure the vast majority of them died a martyr's death. You don't get your due here on this earth. Okay? So that's what makes you so mad about all these evangelists and stuff. That, well, if Jesus was here, he'd be driving a Rolls Royce. And they've actually said that. It's a joke. But they will find out the truth. They will find out the truth. I guarantee it. All right, verse 20. So they have all these answers, and Jesus said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Important question. And Peter answered, the Christ of God. Now, in verse 21, but he warned them and instructed them not to tell anyone. So at this point, it says like, well, duh, right? But you don't understand. He's presenting himself as the Messiah. That was a real revelation. Now, Christ is the Greek word, Christos. What is the Hebrew word? If they were speaking in Hebrew, which I think they were, what would that be? You are
Messiah.
yes, the Mashiach, the Messiah. So Messiah, Hebrew word, Christ is the Greek word. It means literally the anointed one. Okay? The anointed one. And of course, you would anoint prophets and kings by pouring oil and priests over their head. And it talks about even so much it was dripping down the beard of Aaron. So prophets were, kings were, and priests were. Oh, guess what? Jesus was all three. He was a prophet, priest, and king. And then verse 21, he warned them and instructed them not to tell anyone, saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and be raised on the third day. So now he told them repeatedly throughout the Gospels that he was going to be crucified, and they never heard him. And in fact, I think later on it says it was concealed from them. And if we get to that part, I'll tell you why I think it was concealed from them. So that's why when he was crucified and put into the tomb, who should have been there on the third day waiting for Jesus to arise? The disciples, right? He told them numerous times, the third day I'm going to rise again. But who was there? The women. The women were there, not the guys. Verse 23 through 27. Let me title this, okay, Ed's lessons in the last 4 years of his life. It is the most startling revelation you could have. Here it is. You ready? And I'm serious. This is important. It's all about him. That's it. I used to think it was a little bit about me. I used to think that. But when you get smashed and you're reduced to nothing, you discover this. It's all about him. And when you finally, and he's going to talk about it here, and when you finally die to yourself, then you realize Galatians 1:10, what that means. You're either going to please men or you're going to please God, and you've already made the decision. I'm going to please God. I'm going to go forward, full blast for God, period. I don't care what it costs me. And he's going to talk about that right here, okay? So let's go over it. Verse 23, and he was saying to them all, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. That's a pretty heavy thing to say. It doesn't sound like the evangelists today say you got a Jesus shaped, hole in your heart, come and here's all the benefits you're going to get. And you definitely will get benefits. Nowhere do we say, you know what? You got to count the cost, buddy. You're going to be despised. You're going to be hated. And you're going to go against the grain of this world if you follow Jesus. Now, that's just the way it is. I'm not trying to be gloomy or anything. It's the way it is. And just go through Matthew 10. Just go through Matthew 10 if you get a chance. So here's what you must do. If anyone wishes to come after me, this is verse 23, he must deny himself. Now, what are you denying? This is tricky. You're not denying yourself things. You know what you're denying? Self. The flesh. Who you are. You're denying self. You see the difference? You're not denying yourself things. It's much worse than that. You're denying self. Okay? Take up his cross daily. What was the cross? It was an instrument of execution. It was like saying, what did they do today for the death? We don't even have the death sentence. We reward criminals, but used to be the injection, right? It's like, and carry your lethal injection with you daily. Wow. And follow me. So he's not promising anything cushy. Now, I would say this, the joy of the Lord once you become a Christian. See, he's talking about circumstances here and stuff like that. But once you become a Christian, there's a joy that comes with that. Okay? Now, what's the difference between joy and happiness? Happiness is subject to circumstance. When circumstances are up, guess what you are? You're up. If circumstances are down, what's your happiness? Down, right? What's joy? Joy is not, it doesn't matter if your circumstance is up or down. Big difference between happiness and circumstance. Okay, for whoever, 24, whoever wishes to save his life, the word for life there is suke, which is soul. All right? Whoever wishes to save his soul will lose it, but whoever loses his soul for my sake will be the one who saves it. Now, is he talking about physically dying? You have to physically die in order to get saved? No. He means lose it in the sense you're denying yourself and you're totally enveloped in Jesus. Your will is totally enveloped in his. That's a doulos. That's a servant for life who basically his will and the reason he lives is for his master and to please him. If all that sounds down and gloomy, it's not. It's from someone on the outside it does, doesn't it? But for us who understand that, it's like, would you trade that for anything? No. Oh, no. Yeah. To someone who, and it's not, I'm not just saying you become a Christian and it happens. Because what do you got to do? You got to take up your cross daily, right? You got to deny yourself and then follow him. Verse 25. For what is a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits his soul?
This says the joy of the Lord is our strength.
Amen. The joy of the Lord is our strength. Exactly. Exactly right. It's not the circumstances, because if you're counting on good circumstances, well, good luck. Good luck with that. Okay? And so he's saying here, I see people sell out for so little. Remember the Manhattan Indians, I think it was? They sold all of Manhattan for some, fake pearls, right? That was a crummy deal, don't you think? Seriously. That was a really, really crummy deal. But that's what they did. And that's what we do for just the temporal pleasures, our status, our money, our material things. We sell out from following God. Boy, that's a crummy deal. I don't care what you get. Now he's given the scenario of the whole world. You get that. You're still going to come out in the short end. Yeah, that's sad. Verse 26. Now again, this is really challenging because I read this and I apply it to myself. And it really just puts a knife through my heart. For whoever's ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory, and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. Okay? So think about that. I have to think, am I ashamed of Jesus and his words? Because he does have some hard sayings. We just read some of them, right? And do I try to explain that away when I talk to people? I don't need to explain away what Jesus said. I just need to give what he said. So I don't ever want to be ashamed of Jesus. I think it's in the book of Hebrews that talks about those who will shrink back at his return. Okay? I don't want to be one of those. I don't want to be one of those who's going to be afraid of Jesus returning or shrinking back in shame because, oh my gosh, I didn't really live for him. Yeah, I want to live a no regrets life. where I knew I didn't hold anything back for Jesus. Okay? And then verse 27, but I say to you truthfully, there are some of those standing here who shall not taste death until they see the kingdom of God. And we're going to find out what that means next week. Verse 26, okay?
Whoever shall be ashamed of him. Isn't that what happened to, I hope I get the name right, Peter?
Yes, Peter, when he denied him 3 times before the cock crowed. Yes. Now that does not mean that if I was ever in my Christian life ashamed of Jesus, then he's done with me. It doesn't mean that. Okay? He's talking about on a continual basis. See, you're going to grow in the Lord, right?
Yeah.
And things that I used to maybe be scared of or ashamed of, I've learned that the more I've learned about Jesus and the more I love him, the more I'm willing to say, I don't care what people think about me. You know?
Yes.
They can think what they want. That's fine. So yeah, it's not, it says a righteous man will fall 7 times. This is in Proverbs, but he'll get right back up. So it doesn't mean you're sinless. In fact, John tells us, if you say you're without sin, you know that you're a liar. So we're all going to sin. So again, this is not saying that if you're ever ashamed of him or anything like that. It's really about a growth. Do you lose your life instantly you become a Christian? I think it's a process. The more and more you're willing to give up your life, and then the more you're willing just to live for him, and the more you're willing to die to the things of this world, right? And the more you're willing to just give yourself all to him. It's a process. You know what that process is called? Mariah thinks it might be sanctification. She's right. That's the process by which you progress and become more and more like Jesus. Just read the end of Romans chapter 8. In fact, in the Greek, it's a guaranteed process that happens to all believers. The end, remember Romans 8:28? God causes all things to work together for good, right? But keep going on from that. It's called the something like the golden chain of redemption or something. They have some fancy term for it. But it's a guaranteed process from God. That's going to happen to believers. So that's basically more of Jesus, less of you. Who said that? Remember what John the Baptist said? He must increase and I must decrease. There you go. There's going to be less of me, hopefully, as I continue on. Man, I hope this happens, and I know it will, only because of God. There's going to be less of me and more of Jesus. And I know everyone here wants that, right? Yep. Because I'm just sick and tired of this guy named Ed. Just sick and tired of him.